Ainz glanced at Pandora's actor, who was beside him. It's kind of awkward to just walk like this in silence. But there's not really much I'd want to talk to him about. If people were to perceive that their relationship wasn't so great after all, then there wouldn't be a point to this exercise. Ah, Miss Snape. A conversation with Pandora's actor would be insufferable, so Ainz chose to speak to Snape instead. Yes. Hold up, you don't have to answer with such vigor, you know. Ainz thought but did not bother to say out loud. Her actions weren't so strange in hindsight. When all was said and done, they were essentially subordinates under Ainz. How should I say this? How's Yuri's orphanage? Have you visited yet? No, I haven't been there yet. And that was the end of their conversation. That couldn't be because she had a bad relationship with Yuri, but just as she had no interest in that matter, right? Wait a second. Would someone really be so disinterested in the workplace of someone whose existence was their closest analog to family? But that response was also to be expected from Narbril. Would she have reacted in the same way if the question had been about Shizue and Toma's workplace? Ainz shrugged as that thought came up. Shall we visit it then? Because the full responsibility for the orphanage had been given to Yuri, not even Ainz knew of its current status. Of course, he had been given detailed plans about it, but no memory of it remained in Ainz's vacuous, bony head. There should have also been some scheduled reports on the finances of the orphanage, but since Ainz had been delegating those responsibilities to Albedo, he had only pretended to have read those reports. Though he had advocated for talent scouting through the education sector, the Sorcerer's Kingdom had yet to implement the as of now unrealistic policy of universal education for all. If the level of education rose, so will technological and cultural advancements, but it could also strengthen weaklings. Though their current policies may lead to some people with undiscovered talents to stay as farmers for the rest of their lives, Nazarik's peace was their top priority. I don't think that's a bad idea. After Pandora's actor agreed, the trio began walking in another direction led by Narbril. Not even 2 minutes had passed before Ainz received a message. Ainz-sama. Intoma. What's going on? Ainz walked as he talked and felt rather inauspicious. He couldn't remember the last time he had received a message like this in the past year, so it must have been some kind of emergency. But Ainz's fearless smile never wavered. The whole ordeal in the Holy Kingdom was such a pain that nothing could be worse in comparison. Compared to the hell I had to go through, nothing this world could throw at me is undoable. The request, as he had expected, was for him to return to Nazarik immediately. After replying that he would do so, Ainz instructed Narbril to bring the rest of the maids back to Nazarik too. He opened up a gate after bidding his farewells to the two to allow the Hanzos who had been securing their perimeter to go back. Only then did Ainz return to Nazarik himself. After dismissing the Hanzos, he took the ring of Ainz Ulgaun from Solution, who had welcomed him back. Using the ring, he teleported to the 10th floor and began to walk towards the room that was his destination. The rooms that were either important or special in Nazarik had all been marked so that one could teleport straight to their doors with the ring. This was not the case with rooms that had been deemed as normal from the start, and thus one could not teleport straight to them. This could be seen as the only flaw of the ring that allowed its user to teleport freely within Nazarik, but it was no longer possible for them to modify its functions. If they still had the Yggdrasil creator kits around it could be possible, but neither Ainz nor Nazarik's inventory had any. Albedo stood in front of the door to Ainz's destination, awaiting his arrival. Ainz did not probe how long she had been waiting there, but only about the progress she had made on her assigned tasks. You've been working hard, thank you. I'm not worthy of your praise. Ainz sighed on the inside as he witnessed Albedo deeply lowering her head. Though he had said that he would return immediately, he had not given them a specific time frame. The thought that he could have wasted Albedo's time by making her wait unsettled Ainz. He did not and could not let those thoughts show on his face. This had happened several times before. Despite telling Albedo that there was no need for her to wait for him each time, she had always insisted, saying that it was natural for a servant to welcome her master's return. In fact, he had talked about this with not just the floor guardians, but the area guardians and the maids too. Every time he brought it up, their responses would be the same as the one Albedo was giving him right now. The maids were especially enthusiastic with their answers, demonstrating a level of determination that could even make someone like Ainz cower and apologize. If this was the general consensus, then Ainz, as their overlord, had to forego his personal opinions on the matter. Albedo opened the door to the room and welcomed Ainz in. Ainz believed that he was not a man outstanding enough to be worthy of such treatment, and with great guilt, he put on the facade that this was all to be expected and walked into the room before her. Shaltir. Kukaitis. Aura and Mare. And Demiurge. The floor guardians had already been gathered in this room and were all bowing towards the throne that somehow radiated darkness. Behind the throne hung the flag of the Sorcerer's Kingdom of Ainz Ulgaun. It looked like everybody who was supposed to be here was already here. In cases such as this where all hands were on deck, Ainz had to be the last one to arrive according to procedures. Unless it was for a special occasion, no one would arrive later than him. Ainz surveyed the overburdened guardians in front of him. Every floor guardian had been entrusted with their own set of duties in the past, but recently the scope of their work had increased by a wide margin. The air transportation system that mainly relied on flying monsters, mostly dragons, had established a transportation network between the Sorcerer's Kingdom, the Empire, the Dwarven Kingdom, and the desolate Demihuman inhabited region to the east of the Holy Kingdom. The one who was placed in charge of this network, Sheltier, now had the responsibility to utilize her skills to gradually establish a land-based transportation network. The one in charge of controlling the weather in the territories and building an underground tomb on the outskirts of E-Rantel, Mare, was also working alongside the newly established Adventurers Guild. The one in charge of commanding, managing, and training the Sorcerer's Kingdom's army, which consisted mostly of the undead, but also included various types of demihumans and a small number of humans, was Cook Kaitis. The one who used to only have to command her own magical beasts, but now had to operate a department which deployed a warning net that provided adequate coverage over the ever-increasing boundaries of the Sorcerer's Kingdom's territories, was Or. The one who was establishing an intelligence agency on the 7th floor of Nazarick, was Demiurge. Just like that, the responsibilities of each floor guardian grew over time. Which was why there were plans to shift some of those responsibilities to those who up till that point had only been concerned with the internal defense of Nazarick, the area guardians. Needless to say, the one who was in charge of checking up on everybody's progress, receiving requests or suggestions, and approving the various affairs of the Sorcerer's Kingdom, the Guardian Overseer Albedo, had been the busiest of them all. The truth was, no one was as idle as Ainz. His daily duties amounted to simply practicing acting more like an overlord. It was a deeply embarrassing fact to admit. So basically, he had been summoned for something that those who were occupied by the most important tasks had deemed to require his presence. Ainz strode in a dignified manner through the center of the room. Albedo shut the doors behind them and followed closely behind him. He sat on the only seat in the room. Albedo took a knee in front of him and said, Ainz-sama, the floor guardians of every floor have arrived. What do you mean, they have arrived? They were here already. Of course, Ainz did not and could not say that out loud. You floor guardians have been working hard. Raise your heads. Yes. The guardians raised their heads as they gave their crisp answers, an action that was both flawless and in unison. Originally, Albedo had been the one to ask them to raise their heads, but Ainz had decided to put an end to that. Though it had been said that a superior shouldn't talk so easily to their subordinates, Ainz did not want to distance himself from them that much. The guardians' gaze, which made apparent their absolute loyalty, all fell on Ainz's body. In the past, Ainz couldn't handle this kind of attention, but his skin had grown thick in the intervening times to the point that it did not affect him in the slightest these days. But why? Am I getting the wrong impression, or do they feel even more loyal than they were before? No, it has to be the wrong impression, right? Ainz, who couldn't recall doing anything that could have raised their loyalty, avoided the welcoming gazes of the guardians to randomly scan the room he was in. This wasn't because he couldn't handle their gazes, but he did it anyway. On both sides of the room were doors that were dissimilar to the one they had just walked through, doors that were not warranted given the relatively small size of the room. The room was just decorated in such an exquisite manner that it emanated an air of grandeur. It was set up to be the audience room within Nazarick. Another was set up in E-Rantel. Nazarick's throne room was glorious, but it was too spacious and would feel empty if not enough people were gathered inside. He could gather enough people if he wanted to, but considering problems such as the presence of a world-class item, something that was among Nazarick's strongest assets, and thus could not casually be seen by others, an audience room was built. Everything in Nazarick was made by its guild members in the past, except this audience room. Under Ainz's orders, the floor guardians had put great consideration, though it wasn't as though much consideration was necessary anyways, into refitting an empty room for this exact purpose. It made Ainz quite happy. NPCs, made by the guild members, had grown beyond being mere NPCs. It was as though they had become players. There will always come a day when chicks will leave their nests to fly on their own, huh? Ainz smiled mentally. Every one of them had made him proud. Suzuki Satoru had no children, and not many of the other guild members did either. He wasn't sure, but perhaps this was what it was like to be a father. At any rate, this was not what it would be like to be a mother, probably. He immersed himself in his own thoughts for a bit. However, no one would speak until he had spoken, so he was forced to despite not being the MC or something similar. So, Albedo, tell me the reason why everyone was gathered here. It's something important to Nazarick, or rather, to the Sorcerer's Kingdom, right? Yes. Simply put, our grain that was being transported through the kingdom towards the Holy Kingdom was plundered 4 days ago. Oh, and who did that? A noble of the kingdom. The light in Ainz's eyes flashed for a moment. Albedo was being vague. Normally, she would report the name, military power, and goal of the noble all at once. Why is that? Ainz thought about it as he asked further. Did the Eight Fingers merchant in charge of transportation not have soldiers guard the caravans? Moreover, the rule was that our flag should have been flown, yes. Which meant the kingdom had chosen to start a war with us. He had thought, judging by the kingdom's actions, that they were trying to avoid a war, but it now seemed to be an incorrect judgment. Or, was the incident itself some kind of strategy? Ainz took notice of another possibility as his thoughts developed. Could it be that the Eight Fingers had betrayed us? No, well. Albedo lowered her head as she muttered. She then glanced at Ainz as if she were trying to sneak a peek. Ainz thought that her current attitude was quite rare. Rather, this might have been the first time she has ever shown this kind of behavior. She was behaving like a little girl who was afraid of getting scolded, definitely unlike the overseer she had always been. What's wrong, Albedo? Is something the matter? Ainz carefully maintained his dignified facade, and felt as if his back was soaked with sweat. Ainz, of course, could not sweat. Was it because of the mistake Ainz had made? If that was the case, then Albedo's response would make sense. She was behaving like an employee who'd had to point out the mistakes her boss had made that messed everything up. A noble of the kingdom. I have no idea. Did I do something? I didn't do anything funny in the past few months, did I? No, could I? As Ainz, who couldn't even remember the documents he had stamped a few weeks ago, thought about it, it felt more and more like it was a mistake of his own. His anxiety grew alongside his thoughts. No, wait. I got it. Didn't I tell Albedo and Demiurge during the Holy Kingdom thing? And I told a lot of people the same thing after coming back. Yes, I made a mistake deliberately. Pass me, you great. Wait, now is the time to use that excuse.